Welcome back to another episode of What's the Finding? Today we discuss hair salons, particularly in Toronto. Hair has always been a creative topic of discussion since centuries ago. But why talk about hair, you may ask? A group of researchers based at the University of Toronto will join us today to discuss this. Let's welcome Waleed, Phil, Jimmy, and Jay.
Hey!
Tell me about your research.
Today we'll be discussing our capstone project, which aimed to examine hair salons in Toronto, as well as Newmarket and Brampton. So we initially theorized that hair salons would fluctuate in pricing based on location and branding. But this turned out to be way more complicated than we thought. Location findings indicated that prices do vary regionally, with downtown salons charging more on average than suburban ones. Chain hair salons also had an effect on independent salons, but only within certain criteria related to our definition of what a chain is, which was established through our analysis. Lastly, branding did change by region in a way that related to price, such that places that charged higher prices were branded in a specific way.
So, how did you actually go about researching this?
Well, as Jay said, we examined hair salons throughout different locations within and outside Toronto. The 5 regions our research focused on were Entertainment District, Yorkville, Kensington Market, Newmarket, and Brampton.
So wait, how did you guys select the regions you wanted to study?
Well, our group wanted a good representation of hair salons in vastly different locations. This allowed us to examine the link between location and pricing. We split up our regions to analyze into 2 subgroups, urban and suburban, meant to represent higher and lower ends of the pricing spectrum respectively.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Has anyone really done this before?
Yeah, for Patterson Silver, we borrowed 3 of their series, Critical Mass, Perfect Audience, and Urbanism. Urbanism have people converging into a neighborhood that is seen as creative or artistic, whereas Critical Mass states that art growth occurs where artistic and creative identities already exist in certain neighborhoods. Finally, Perfect Audience involves attracting the right people within a district.
So, what do these theories look like in action?
Well, to accurately quantify these theories, our group looked at a variety of variables. These included average rent, average income, population density, and age majority across all 5 regions. For average rent, Yorkville was the highest, while Brampton was the lowest, as you can see in the graph. As expected, a similar pattern was seen when looking at average income, with Yorkville again coming at top and Brampton at below. We see a similar pattern again when looking at population density, with the downtown location having a higher density than the suburban areas. We looked at age but did not find any significant findings. To make it easier to understand, we decided to rank our variables of population density, income, and rent on a scale from high, medium, and low. This is shown on the screen right now.
So, what did you guys find?
We see that our hypothesis was true as downtown areas charged more than the suburban areas like Brampton.
Wait, so what about those theories you mentioned?
Yeah, so the perfect audience theory focused on hair salons adjusting their pricing levels in accordance to their target customers, meaning that those that are located in more affluent areas would charge a higher price than those hair salons that are not in those areas. So in theory, hair salons in areas like Yorkville and Entertainment District would market themselves as young and hip, depending on the area age demographic. The data showed that hair salons in locations near downtown and areas with higher rent and higher income did in fact charge more for haircuts than their suburban counterparts. Throughout the research, we see urbanism at play. We see that Yorkville and Entertainment District both are more urban than our other locations. We see the difference in urbanity between our regions when looking at Kingston Market. The lack of websites from the salons in the region show their lack of urbanity. Only 5 salons out of the 15 had an official website, showing the drastic difference in urbanism between the regions. An interesting fact is that we hypothesized that Kensington Market would join the group of Entertainment and Yorkville, especially when testing for critical mass. This was only true if we removed chain stores out of Kensington Market. Our data suggests that just like entertainment district in Yorkville, it is also mainly uses fashion and craft in their branding.
Wait, why would you remove the chains?
While chain stores in our research resulted in some interesting findings on their own, our hypothesis actually coincides with this. What I wanted to show was that chain hair salons would only have an effect on hair salons that are directly competing with them and would not affect independent hair salons that were not directly competitive towards chain hair salons. This theory is called creative destruction. Chain hair salons are also mostly situated in lower population density areas, conglomerating in areas that are in need of cost efficiency salons. This theory coincides with location. Independently owned salons would be more expensive within regions of Toronto rather than Brampton and Newmarket. This coincides with pricing.
How did you guys define your chain stores though?
Chain stores were defined as having 3 or more locations, with the option of franchising made available. The differences came with standardized pricing. Some places had standardized pricing, while some didn't. As such, chain stores were labeled as Chain Store A to have standardized pricing, and some were labeled as Chain Store B, which did not have standardized pricing. Those that did not fall in any of the criteria were labeled as independent hair salons. As such, in the tables that we have shown here, CSAs had the most consistent and least variance in pricing from $26 to $31. CSBs had less consistent and more variance in pricing, $30 to $150. And independent hair salons had the least consistent and most variance in pricing, going from $10 to $150.
So Phil, what are you going to walk us through?
So first I'm going to talk about creative destruction. So an independent store in close proximity towards the chain hair salons would be the most affected, either becoming obsolete or having to competitively price in order to stay relevant. When looking at CSAs, there was not much creative destruction being done with other independent hair salons. The average prices for all independent stores was higher than CSAs. Looking at CSBs tells a different story. There seems to be creative destruction implemented towards independent hair salons, but only in Kensington and Yorkville. The average prices for these independent hair salons in Kensington and Yorkville are lower than CSBs, except for the entertainment district. This means that both Kensington and Yorkville follow the creative destruction theory, whereas the entertainment district does not.
What can you tell us about locations though?
CSAs are more towards suburban areas of Brampton and Newmarket and did not show up in downtown Toronto, which proved our initial hypothesis. But for CSBs, they were more within downtown Toronto and did not show up in Brampton or Newmarket, which runs contrary to our original hypothesis. This is due to the non-standardized pricing that is involved with CSBs, as these salons can price themselves in accordance towards the area at hand. In this case, when pricing themselves in higher density areas that also tend to have higher priced independent salons, CSBs can match those and also price in that fashion. They also focus a lot on creativity because the area that the independent salons are in also focus within creativity and do not do so with cost efficiency.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Has anyone really done this before?
Yeah, for Patterson Silver, we borrowed 3 of their series: Critical Mass, Perfect Audience, and Urbanism. Urbanism have people converging into a neighborhood that is seen as creative or artistic, whereas Critical Mass states that art growth occurs where artistic and creative identities already exist in certain neighborhoods. Finally, Perfect Audience involves attracting the right people within a district.
That's something you don't learn about every day. Was there more to the project?
Yeah, so we initially set out to research the influence of variables such as location and branding on price. Initially, we theorized that regions that use specific branding, such as fashion, expert, and craft, tended to charge more for haircuts. Alternatively, the regions that use branding such as utility and tradition charged less on average for haircuts. For us, the former was theorized to be the downtown regions, while the latter was the suburban regions.
Awesome. Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, so our key set of findings included two main ideas. With branding in mind, we set out to examine this through coding a number of variables and subvariables. This is available in the table. This was coded for frequency, which allowed us to view discernible differences within and between regions. Moreover, this also allowed us to view the effects of branding on price, because we were able to create categories and map on the regions to this classification, such that specific regions had a predominant branding style that stood out when averaging the branding category scores by region. This is available in the table as well. So the cool idea here is that the urban regions showed a pattern in that they tended to use similar types of branding, which was craft and fashion, whereas the suburban regions tended to use fashion and expert. The interesting finding here is that fashion remained significant as one of the two predominant branding categories regardless of region or salon. This is further reinforced when we controlled for chain salons, such that these same exact predominant categories emerge for the same regions, with fashion continuing to be present in all. This was hypothesized to be the case because of the hair industry's clear ties to notions of aesthetics and physical appearance. As such, regardless of region and heterogeneity within salons, fashion emerges as a key way in which salons brand. But this was only partially confirmed, as our urban regions used fashion and craft as predicted, and our suburban regions actually used craft and expert, which was contradictory to our theory that they used tradition and utility to brand themselves.
Oh wow! So what's the second finding?
The second cool finding that emerged was that branding as a variable was not as clear-cut as it initially appeared, because there was a level of variability within each category and how the regions fared. So here we incorporated the use of scores, such that each region was given a score on each of the 5 categories. This helped us categorize any given region as high, medium, or low on that branding type. The findings from this step indicated a deeper look at the findings previously mentioned, such that even though a branding type was predominant in one region, this data indicated whether or not that branding style was actually high or low. This produced contradictory findings because some regions such as Brampton had the highest averages on fashion and expert, and yet in reality, the majority of the scores within that variable and region were in fact average and low. This was quite interesting because it provided a different approach to analyze the same data. So we can see that our main hypothesis was somewhat supported here, which stated that the regions that use specific branding such as fashion and craft tended to charge more for haircuts. Where our theory gained limited support was the actual regions that utilized this branding, wherein the suburbs used fashion and expert in contrast to our prediction that they would use utility and tradition. In spite of this, however, the suburbs branded slightly differently than the urban areas and also charged lower, which is consistent with what we hypothesized.
Alright, thanks Jay. So do we have any concluding thoughts on the matter?
Yes, actually. When reflecting back, our initial hypothesis for location, branding, and chain stores were mostly true. Although our 3 theories by Patterson and Silver were pertinent towards our findings, the most strongly supported theory was urbanism. As well, the location of a hair salon was a determinant of whether or not pricing was higher or lower. Branding also varies alongside location, and this is further supported by these changes of price. With chain hair salons, there was some pushback between our initial hypothesis, as our definition of chain hair salons splitting into chain store A, B, and independent stores created more nuance towards our hypothesis.
Wow, hair salons really do have more than meets the eye. This conversation has been very informative, and I hope this research has shed new light onto the topic of hair salons. Thank you for joining us in this episode of What's the Finding? This was your host, Sarah. See you next time.